Esther 8. That same day King Ahasuerus gave Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, and Mordecai came before the king, because Esther had declared who he was. And she took off the king's ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther put Mordecai in charge of Haman's house. Esther spoke more before the king, and threw herself at his feet, and she wept, and besought him to revoke the wickedness of Haman the Agagite, and the purpose which he had designed against the Jews. And the king held out the golden scepter to Esther. Then Esther arose and stood before the king. And he said, If it seems good to the king, and if I have found favor with him, and if this matter is right in the king's sight, and if I please him in his eyes, let it be written that the letters conceived by Haman son of Hammedatha be revoked. The Agagite, which he wrote to annihilate the Jews, who are in all the king's provinces. For how can I see the evil that will come to my people? And how can I see the destruction of my family? Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and Mordecai the Jew, Behold, I gave Esther the house of Haman, and they hanged him on a gallows, because he had stretched out his hands against the Jews. Write therefore to the Jews, as seems good in your eyes, in the name of the king, and seal it with the king's ring, because the document that is written in the name of the king, and that is sealed with the king's ring, cannot be revoked. Then the king's clerks were called at that same time, in the 3rd month, which is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day, and it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded to the Jews, and also to the satraps, and to the governors, and to the leaders of the provinces, which extended from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, to each province according to its manner of right, and to every people according to their language, and also to the Jews according to their manner of writing, and according to their language. And it was written in the name of King Ahasuerus, and, sealing them with the king's ring, they sent the letters by the hand of couriers on horseback, who rode on horses, which were from the king's stables. In them, the king granted the Jews, who were in each city, to gather together and prepare themselves to defend their lives, and to destroy, kill and annihilate all the forces of the people in the province that came against them, children and women, and their possessions were plundered. On the same day, in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. And a copy of the letter would be circulated as a decree in all the provinces, and published among all the people, so that the Jews would be prepared for that day, to take revenge on their enemies. The couriers, on swift riders, left hurriedly, impelled by the king's word, and this order was published in the fortress of Susa. Then Mordecai came out from the king's presence in royal robes of sky blue and white, with a great crown of gold, and with a robe of fine purple linen, and the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. And to the Jews there was light, and gladness, and joy, and honor. Also in every province, and in every city, wherever the king's word and his command reached, there was joy and joy among the Jews, banquets and days of merrymaking, and many of the people of the land became Jews, because the fear of the Jews had fallen upon them. Esther 9. And in the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, on the 13th day of the same month in which the word of the king came and his command to be carried out, in the day on which the enemies of the Jews expected to master them, there came to pass the contrary, because the Jews were the ones who took control of those who hated them. For the Jews in their cities, in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, gathered together to lay their hands on those who sought harm from him, and no one could resist them, because their fear had fallen on all those people. And all the leaders of the provinces, and the satraps, and the governors, and those who did the king's work, helped the Jews, for the fear of Mordecai had fallen upon them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame grew throughout all the provinces, because the man Mordecai was becoming great. So the Jews struck down all their enemies with swords, with slaughter and with destruction, and they did to their enemies what they wanted. And in the fortress of Susa the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men, as well as Parsandata, and Dalphum and Aspida, and Porata, and Adalia, and Aridata, and Pharmasta, and Arisai, and Aridai, and Visata, the 10 sons of Haman, son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, killed, but they did not extend their hand to the spoil. On the same day, the number of those killed in the Susa fortress was communicated to the king. And the king said unto Esther the queen, In the fortress of Susa the Jews slew and destroyed 500 men, and the 10 sons of Haman, in the king's most provinces, what would they have done? So what is your request? And it will be given to you. Or what is your requirement? And it will be done. Then Esther said, If it seems good to the king, let it be granted to the Jews who are in Shushan that they also do tomorrow according to today's commandment, and hang the 10 sons of Haman on a gallows. Then the king said to do so, and an edict was published in Susa, and they hanged the 10 sons of Haman. And the Jews who were in Susa also gathered together on the 14th day of the month Adar, and killed 300 men in Susa, but they did not extend their hand to the spoil. Also the other Jews who were in the king's provinces gathered together and prepared themselves in defense of their lives, and had rest from their enemies, and they killed 75,000 of their enemies, but they did not extend their hand to the spoil. This happened on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and they rested on the 14th day, and made that day a day of feasting and joy. Also the Jews, who were in Susa, gathered together on the 13th and 14th of the same, and they rested on the 15th, and made that day a day of feasting and joy. But the Jews of the villages, who dwelt in the towns, made the 14th day of the month of Adar a day of gladness and feasting, and a day of merrymaking, and of sending gifts to one another. And Mordecai wrote these things, and sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, to those near and to those far away, commanding them to observe the 14th day of the month Adar, and the 15th day thereof, every year, like the days in which the Jews had rest from their enemies, in the month that turned them from sorrow into joy, and from mourning into a feast day, so that they made them a day of feasting and gladness, and of sending gifts to one another, others, and gifts to the poor. And the Jews undertook to do what they had already begun, as well as what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman, the son of Hamdata the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had intended to destroy the Jews, and had cast that is, the lot, to desolate and destroy them. But when this came before the king, he ordered by letters that the evil intention that Haman had formed against the Jews should be brought back upon his head, so they hung him and his sons on a gallows. That's why they call those days Purim, from the name Pur, so also because of all the words of that letter, and what they saw about it, and what had happened to them. The Jews confirmed, and took it upon themselves, and upon their descendants, and upon all that came near to them, that these 2 days should not fail to be kept according to what was written about them, and according to their appointed time, all the years. And that these days would be remembered and kept in every generation, family, province and city, and that these days of Purim would not be revoked among the Jews, and that the memory of them would never end among those of their descendants. Then Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew, wrote with all authority a second time, to confirm the letter concerning Purim. And they sent letters to all the Jews, to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, with words of peace and truth, to confirm these days of Purim in their appointed times, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had established for them, and as they themselves had already established for themselves and for their descendants, regarding fasting and their cry. And Esther's command established the successes of that Purim, and it was written in the book. Esther 10. After this King Ahasuerus imposed tribute on the land and on the islands of the sea. And all the deeds of his power and valor, and the record of the greatness of Mordecai, whom the king exalted, are they not written in the book of the chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For the Jew Mordecai was the second after King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and esteemed by the multitude of his brethren, seeking the good of his people, and proclaiming the prosperity of all his offspring. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and leave a comment.